Okay, so I would propose that we start our panel, and of course, I think we have an ideal portfolio of speakers to deal with the important issue that is for this panel. It's ideal in two ways. It's ideal in subjective terms because of the very high competence and very important role that our panelists cover. It's ideal from an objective point of view because we have all possible perspective on the issue. We have someone from the core, someone from what is now commonly called the periphery. We have someone who is a new member of the euro area. We have someone who is a prospective member of the euro area. So we can expect that they will provide us with different perspectives that will possibly give us a fully round view of the issue. The title of this panel is mixed. It's encouraging, but it's also worrying. It's encouraging because, of course, complacency, the risk of complacency comes when things are not so bad. You don't run the risk of being complacent at the peak of the crisis. So it must mean that we are not at the peak of the crisis. But it's worrying. Because we know that what has been done, and quite a lot has been done to address the crisis, was done under the pressure of the markets. And when the pressure relents, we know that the efforts also slow down. So we may fear that, yes, we are in a calmer situation, but that the wrong conclusion will be drawn that enough has been done and that we can now go for coffee or go to the beach. And that would be a mistake because the situation is calmer because markets have the expectation that the efforts will continue, that what has been promised will be delivered, that the progress that has been carried out so far will continue until the necessary solutions to the crisis will have been found. We agreed that we will listen to the different presenters in the order in which they are in the program. I will address a few questions to each of the speakers, but of course each of the speakers will be free to deal with any topic that is related to the issue we are discussing. So I would just start with Mr. Christian Kastrup, who is Director for Fiscal Policy Department at the Federal Ministry of Finance of the Federal Republic of Germany. And the specific question that I would like to put to Mr. Kastrup is that while the situation, as I said, is definitely calmer in market sense, there are two risks that are still looming, in particular seen from a core country perspective. The first risk is that there could be support fatigue in the core that could break the virtuous circle that has been developing so far between adjustment in the periphery and financial and political support from the core. So my question to Mr. Kastrup, my first question to Mr. Kastrup is whether he sees this risk and how does he assess it. The second question is whether there is a risk that, again, complacency would slow down or even stop the progress towards the institutional innovations which we know are necessary to complement monetary union, banking union, fiscal union, even political union. Is there a risk that the progress towards these institutional innovations will be stopped or slowed down now? So, Mr. Kastrup, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for, first of all, for inviting me to this beautiful city of Bratislava, even if it's now snowy, icy, and something like that. So as Germany was mentioned yesterday and also today, and I guess it is also mentioned in this panel, I will try also to draw some general opinion from Germany, but I should say, first of all, that this is by no means the opinion of my minister or the opinion of my ministry. It's just my personal opinion, being in charge a little bit of strategy and concept. So what has happened? Reasons for crisis, I just click it, you know it. Unsustainable public finance, also with an SGP where enforcement was lacking. Macroeconomic imbalances, we have already talked about competitiveness and maybe the not used windfall profits from creating the European Union in some countries. Then we have something grossly underestimated for some years, and I think everybody is guilty here, also the core countries, not to look at unsustainable private debt, which mean also the situation of the banks. And of course, this has to be seen in line with the development of globalized financial markets, with all these new products and all this new, say, volatility in the market and all this virtual pyramid of capital and derivatives we now see, which makes it so worse, and this goes then in the whole discussion of contagion and whatever you mean. We have solutions so far. So we have, on the public finance side, we have liquidity assistance with a strong conditionality given. We have the ESM, EFSF system given. We have a strengthened SGP, six-pack is already being talked about. We have enhanced rules and procedures. There is more enforcement in the system than given. We have the macroeconomic imbalance procedure given. Then we have the ECB also stepping forward as far as the mandate makes it possible. We have seen the LTRO and we have seen the OMT, which of course also takes charge of the situation. And then we have seen the start of the banking union as discussed yesterday evening, a single surveillance mechanism. And of course there are other actors at stake, given, say, the EIB and others who are also in the business of helping us through the crisis, the sovereign debt crisis and other crises linked to that. This may do, and of course we have heard yesterday 2/3 of the way, we have gone 2/3 of the way, but the last 1/3 is the most heavy one. I do not comment on the 2/3, it depends a little bit where you want to reach when you have 2/3, but nevertheless there is one big argument that we cannot be complacent right now because there are a lot of open questions. I will mention some. What is if the conditionality system does not work? It would create immediate, so far there is no hint that it does not work at all. It works so far, but anyway there will be some hardship to deliver the last third. So this will have some consequences not only for finance ministers but also for the ECB. It will give more questions. The ESM has still the problem of the firewall. The strengthened SGP has still the problem that entirely political commitment is necessary to work with that. The macroeconomic imbalance procedure, as the macroeconomic surveillance of the European Systemic Risk Board, has not delivered any proposal or hint yet, or critical proposal yet. Then what if the banking union will stuck? What if some risks also of the monetary policy so far do emerge? Then you have normal economic risks, and this was also mentioned today. There is the possibility of a downturn. There is a democratic deficit. I will not just mention it in a political way. There is also a constitutional problem, especially also in Germany, where the Constitutional Court is very, very keen on looking of the core of sovereignty of the national states. So we are not a federation yet. We are kind of a hybrid. So this might all push us back to square one if there would be complacency in the Eurozone. So if we talk about a federation, we have two approaches to talk about a federation. One would be theory. Theory of federations would talk about public goods, club goods, spillover, and it would be about subsidiarity principle and common preferences from economic point of terms. What does that mean? It was mentioned here. Public goods would probably help us if the federation is doing defense. But now it's doing bananas and the noise level of lawnmowers. So here was said, can't we go back? I think there is a point that at least we have to recalibrate some things the federation is doing now and the federation will do in the future. So there is a point for Cameron in a certain sense, I have to say that. Then, of course, there are very different preferences on fiscal, on economic and labor. I think we have made the Stability and Growth Pact and other things now in the pipeline to calibrate the process of growing together, of preferences growing together, but there still will be different preferences for the time to come, also in fiscal and economic, in labor markets, social affairs, and we could not get rid of that and we could not overthrow that. So, and now I come to the second pillar. This is existing federations, and it was mentioned by Marty Hettemeke in the panel before. It takes us some years to do that. And so what we, I think, need in the end is a kind of an open integrational structure which leaves room for moving forward with the federational level, but looking what we put there. But the baseline have to be markets. Without markets, an incomplete federation will not work. This would mean a clear restatement of the no bailout principle. This would clearly mean at a certain point in time we have to discuss the restructuring scheme, also as Marty put it, with the US experience. Second pillar would be national ownership, so I strongly preferring also the contractualization approach. I think this is a good job, getting ownership, and then trying to invent structures on top of that, federal institutions which might help us to bring things together. If the political economy cannot come forward with that, then we might also rethink the approach, doing some things for the time being with a kind of an independent agencies, for instance, like the ECB, an independent resolution authority and all that. And so, coming to an end, reform fatigue would be most dangerous, and I think there is enough pressure also from a core country to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now I would move to Mr. Fernandez de Mesa, who is General Secretary of the Treasury and Financial Policy Ministry of Economy and Competitiveness of the Kingdom of Spain. Maybe I would take the freedom of asking him, as I will with Mr. Panos Tsakloglu, who is the Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisor of the Ministry of Finance of the Hellenic Republic, the same questions. And the question is that I've asked Mr. Kastrup about support fatigue, and I find it natural to ask the Spanish perspective on adjustments fatigue. I mean, that is the other risk of a consolidation of the currently calmer situation. And what is the assessment of this risk in Spain? And I think that it's useful to think of adjustment as being composed of two components, fiscal correction and structural measures. And is it justified to think that overall, and maybe in Spain in particular, more has been done on the fiscal than on the structural issue? And if this is the case, and of course I'm very interested to hear the view of Mr. De Mesa here, if this is the case, that there has been more fiscal than structural adjustment, what are the prospects of more structural adjustment coming to exit as soon as possible from the recessionary situation in which the periphery of Europe is now, which of course is a strong headwind to getting out of the crisis?
Thank you very much. I think that this is a very pertinent question. I think that, there are two important things, first of all, to bear in mind. When we try to make stereotypes about countries and one-fits-all kind of imbalances, and the reality is that the situation of the different countries that has been hampered by the crisis over the last years is quite different. I mean, the origin of the problems are different, and probably the remedies are different as well. Let me make a few remarks about Spain and about what happened in 2012 and what we have done and where we are aiming at. Last year was a year in Spain of intensive reforms. both in the fiscal side and in the structural reforms. I mean, it was very important because, I mean, our starting position was with large imbalances. We had a big accumulation of private debt, and in concrete, the debt was concentrated on the corporates, and within the corporates, on the corporate related to the real estate. So there was accumulation of private debt. Our stock of debt is manageable, well below the euro area average, 40% below Italy or Ireland, or well below France and Belgium. But our problems was more related to domestic debt on the one hand, and private debt on the other hand, on the big deficit that we had that was increasing the debt very rapidly. So these were basically the two main imbalances. And the private debt, reflect also a weakened position in the financial sector. So in this context, I mean, we implemented last year a very in-depth reform in 3 areas, which were very important. On the one hand, on the fiscal area, we approved a law that apply what we agreed in Europe in the fiscal compact, and we did a very ambitious reform there, especially with the regions. Secondly, we carried out a very ambitious reform in the labor market, which was liberalize a lot the framework of the labor market, and which is having a very important result. And third, very importantly, we accomplished a very in-depth reform in the financial sector. We did in 6 months a reform in the financial sector that normally takes years in many countries. So these were the main 3 reforms that we undertook last year, and we have had very important fruits because of that. First of all, I mean, it's very important because when we look back 2-3 years ago, it looked like impossible that a country like Spain with a current account deficit of 10% could manage to reduce this current account deficit without devaluating the currency. And I have to say that in less than 4 years, we have reduced by 10% our current account deficit. I mean, at the end of 2012, we will be almost in balance, and we will run a surplus in 2013. And our GDP has proved to be resilient. I mean, we have reduced 10% of current account deficit without only losing 5% of GDP. So this is very important because, I mean, it has proved that it is possible to make an external adjustment in a monetary union. And I think this is a very good example. I mean, and what is more important about this adjustment is that it has taken place not because there has been a reduction in imports, that is the case, but because the performance of exports has been very good. I mean, we have had a very good performance of our export market. The second point, fiscal, I mean, that we have had very good result is on the fiscal side. I mean, we will release very soon the data of 2012, and we have managed to reduce the deficit very substantially in a very difficult environment with negative growth, without a full-year budget because the government entered in January last year, and it has been. I mean, it is possible to adjust in negative circumstances like the ones that we are having. And finally, I mean, the reform in the financial sector has been very intensive. One very quick remark on that. Probably our problem last year was not so much about the impact of the financial sector recap on the sovereign, but the lack of transparency. I mean, the banking program of Spain has been 3.5% of GDP. And it was exactly what we said that was the loophole back in February last year. And by the way, the same figure that the IMF released in February. But there was a lot of noise, there was a lack of transparency, and probably the increase of transparency in the financial sector is something that is going to help us. A very quick comment about complacency. I mean, things are improving. I think that we are in a much better shape than we were last year. But still, I mean, we have never lost access to capital markets. Now markets are coming back not to normality, but almost to normality. But we still are paying a very high spread compared to other countries. I think that complacency to countries like Spain is not going to happen. I mean, we still have room to improve in many areas. Complacency could happen more to countries perhaps which are paying negative rates because they feel more comfortable than we do. Our problem now is not so much on the public sector, which, well, even at this high spread that I think will correct in the coming months, our problem is more related to the funding of the private sector. It doesn't make any sense that an SME in Spain with the same level of risk of an SME in Belgium, France, or Germany pays 350 basis points above a company elsewhere. So this is why, I mean, for us, it's very important to take reforms in Europe and to push forward and to push very strongly on the banking union. I mean, it's very important to break down the feedback loop between the sovereign and the banking sector, because we need a level playing field in Europe, and this is very important. We need the correct functioning of the monetary transmission mechanism, and for us, I mean, one of the key reforms, I mean, because we are going to deliver domestically, and this is something that we have very clear, we are going to push for reforms in Europe, especially in the banking union. One final comment as well, to make things clear, what is more damaging for countries like Spain is doubts about the euro. You talked before about fatigue in reforming Europe and fatigue on delivering on core countries. I have to remind that in absolute terms, we are the fourth contributor to all programs in Europe, and we have made a big effort in 2012. And in relative terms, I mean, we are contributing like any other country. And for us, it's very important to achieve stability in the euro. And this is the best medicine for us for the future to continue the current stability in the markets.
Well, thank you very much. Of course, your first statement was that there are differences between countries. So possibly the same question that I put to you would give different answers from Mr. Sakloglu, who, as I said, is the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisor at the Ministry of Finance of the Hellenic Republic.
Right. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation to visit beautiful Bratislava. And unlike what Carsten said there, for somebody coming from the south, having this snow outside, it was a blessing rather than a curse. Now, to come to the topic of, to come to the questions that I was asked by the organizers. First of all, Greece entered the crisis in really awful situations. There were two problems that were extremely acute. One was fiscal imbalances, the second one was current account problems. And there were underlying trends that were hinting into very serious problems in the future, like if the pension system was left unchecked, this would create even larger deficits in the future. Unlike what was until recently often reported in the international press, the adjustment that has taken place in Greece is really phenomenal by any account of any developed country in the post-war period. Primary deficit, as Jörg Asmussen mentioned yesterday, within a period of 3 years, came down from over 10% to what we expect next year to be zero, if not a small primary surplus. Current account deficit starting from an enormous, almost 15%. Next year, it may well be close to zero. Competitiveness, as measured by unit labor cost, by the end of this year, we expect to reach, if not overcompensate, the losses that we had since the introduction of the euro and so on. On top of this, and again, unlike what is heard often in the public discourse, in the international media and so on, there was very substantial change in the front of structural reforms. There were very brave reforms undertaken, reforming the pension system, the labor market, the product market, the healthcare sector, just to say a few. And reforms were in several other sectors as well. However, all these things came at an enormous cost. Greek economy this year is contracting for a 6th year in a row. The cumulative decline in GDP, it was in the region already of 20% of GDP, and by the end, when we hope the end will be by the end of this year, this number may approach something like 25%. Just to give you a historical perspective, corresponding declines in GDP we had during the period of the Great Crisis only in the United States, and larger than that, only in Germany. The concomitant cost of this decline in GDP, it was, of course, a huge rise in unemployment, starting from below 10%, which was already a relatively high level. Unemployment this year is already at 27%, and we expected the peak to reach levels that may be in excess of 30% of the labor force. Even more dramatic, it is what is happening to the younger segments of the population. Quite often what is quoted is the unemployment rate of people below 25, which exceeds 60% at the moment. However, there are relatively few of them in the labor market. However, if you go to the next age bracket, 25 to 34, which is probably the most productive period for somebody's life, the unemployment rate there exceeds 30%, far exceeds 30%. On top of this, even those lucky ones who have retained their incomes, the decline in income is larger than the decline in GDP that I mentioned before, because quite a lot of the adjustment has taken place in the form of increased taxes, as well as cuts in social spending and so on. What I'm trying to say with all these things. Just to come to your question about reform fatigue and so on. Reform fatigue, in my opinion, can come from two sources. It can come either from the political establishment or from the people themselves. In the political establishment, at least in the mainstream parties, it is clearly understood that there is no other alternative. The alternative for Greece is a catastrophic one, and they are determined to stick to this road. The question is what's happening to the general population. So far, all the polls that we have seem to suggest that this fatigue exists, but is not the dominant force. However, if there is no growth prospect in the end of the road, I'm afraid that this risk may become a real one. And frankly, I do not think that Greece is unique in this case. This can apply to almost every other country that can come to my mind. I can perfectly agree with the argument heard yesterday about structural reforms delivering the goods in the long term. This is absolutely right, and I agree with this statement. However, one has to take into account the question, how long is the long run? Can the political process have the counter-arguments to these economic arguments? This is an open question.
Thank you very much. So we move to outside of the euro area. The question I would like to ask to Mr. Radek Urban, Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Finance of the Czech Republic, is the following. The countries of the European Union who are not as yet members of the euro area have a great stake in developments in the euro area, both from a financial monetary point of view and from an economic perspective, not to mention the political one. Now, what is your assessment seen from outside of what has been done so far in the euro area to deal with the crisis? In particular, do you have a feeling that because of the effort in countering the crisis, that the euro area has become a bit introvert, is not paying enough attention to the rest of the European Union, and maybe not enough attention to the world at large, to the global financial, economic, and political situation? And the second question I would like to ask you, in what way does the current crisis impact on the prospect of a non-euro area country like the Czech Republic to adopt the euro in due course? I mean, in which way does it affect the public opinion and the government policy in this respect?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thanks for inviting me as an outsider. This is the only country that is not in the Eurozone, and it's very pleasing that you have thought of us. I certainly, whatever I say, please take with a big discount, because the Czech Republic is a land of paradoxes. I will use these paradoxes to demonstrate our situation, and in no way I will try to tell the Eurozone what to do. I can offer lessons, because we also have been living through a banking crisis. We also have been living through a political crisis. And there's lessons that I may use. But first to these paradoxes. The Czech Republic is a country where there is no policy of banker bashing. Yet, 13 years ago, we had a systemic bank going down. 15 years ago, we had a series of banks, small banks going down. All of them had been put to bankruptcy. This actually reflects on the notion of yesterday evening about creative destruction. The words of a famous Austrian, not Schumpeter, but Gernot Mittendorfer. We have one thing that I see from the outside is we have not seen enough bankruptcies of banks in the Eurozone. I'm not saying it's good and bad, but it certainly sends a signal. And the one lesson that I can offer from the Czech Republic is investors prefer countries that had their crisis already. It worked for us in the 1990s, and the series of small banks going under in 1994, 5, 6 helped us in understanding that we need to be more transparent and more forward-thinking. Now, the other paradox I would like to mention to you is the following. Very soon, the Czech Republic, 1 year from now, maybe 2 years from now, may be a net contributor to the EU budget. There is some in our political scene that say, well, we are like Germany, no? We will soon contribute to the EU budget. Maybe we will be in a position to tell others what to do. Now, this is certainly wrong. This is not correct because it doesn't say about the past almost 10 years where we have been net recipient of the cohesion funds. We are still claiming we are the so-called friends of cohesion. So this may mean that we will easily be lured into slipping into a bit patronizing, but no way. I mean, this would be very wrong for us to be patronizing. Now, to the question of complacency, I will be critical, but I will be optimistic. Apart from the not enough bankruptcies, there is a couple of things on the banking union project that I need to mention. There's these pillars about single supervisory, about the deposit insurance. There's one more pillar that is often neglected, and that is CRD. And CRD is actually trying to strengthen banks, but there are areas where the cost of strengthening banks in terms of capital and counterparty dealing is pushing the cost on counterparties. I have deep troubles explaining to corporate clients that when they deal with banks in derivatives, these corporate clients have to post collateral. They need to sign the credit support agreements. They need to understand things like credit value adjustments. And why these corporate clients have not caused the crisis. These corporate clients have not been saved by the governments. So this is a bit critical because in order to strengthen banks, we are pushing to burden of two other economic agents. Now, on the last issue that Francesco asked me about whether the current situation has an impact on the Czech Republic long-term commitments. No. We are a member of the European Union. We have agreed that we will adopt the euro at the one time. I hope it will be sooner than later. The current troubles in the Eurozone effectively have two dimensions. They have an economic dimension and they have a political dimension. And The political dimension, as I watch the political scene in the Czech Republic, they can change very soon. 1 year from now, we will have election, and the existing parliamentary opposition have very clearly demonstrated that they will be more pro-European. I am starting to take bets where the new prime minister will go first, whether to Bratislava, or to Berlin, or to Brussels. The last thing I would like to say, geographically and historically, we are part of Europe. We belong. I often use jokingly that we are the Zipcenter Bundesland, economically, energetically, wherever. If I say this to my German friends and colleagues, they say, no, 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 no. The 17th place is already taken by Mallorca. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much. So now we have Vasil Hudak, State Secretary at the Ministry of Finance of the Slovak Republic. And the issue I would like to put forward for him to consider is that newer members of the euro area may feel that they've been unlucky in the timing of the entry, because they entered when the euro area was about to get into crisis. Or maybe on the contrary, they could think that they've been lucky because they came at the time when the euro area is changing. And so that's an occasion of contributing to innovations in the euro area. There is a window of opportunity for change that has opened. And so I would like to ask him whether indeed there has been a sense of being unlucky, or maybe lucky in having entered the euro area at that precise point in time. The other question is whether he has any advice to give to his neighbor, sitting neighbor and geographical neighbor in terms of adoption of the euro. And the last question maybe is whether there is a feeling that the needs and interests of new members of the euro area have been taken fully into account in the resolution of the crisis, or whether the old boy network, so to say, has not allowed the new members to have the full voice in the endeavor.
Thank you, Chairman. And, again, yeah, this one. Okay. Maybe before I go to the points and your questions, I would like to make a few other statements. First of all, I would like to really express my huge appreciation to my colleagues from the Euro Working Group, especially. You already heard many of them in previous discussions. Harald from Austria, Marty from Finland, Inigo from Spain, Panos from Greece. These are just a few members of the group who is meeting very regularly in Brussels. And of course, we have our chairman, Thomas Wieser, who is sitting there, and he will be speaking later. But we have really become friends who I think really symbolize what the Eurozone is about, but of course in a broader context, the European Union. And sometimes we joke that we, especially towards the end of the last year when we were dealing with some of the crisis issues and firefighting, that we actually spend more long nights together than with our wives. So the intensity of cooperation, especially when solving the problems, is also I think a kind of building block of the cooperation. Now, on the topic of this panel, I think when looking at the overall situation in the Eurozone, obviously we can be now kind of satisfied and calmer, which is good. We can move from firefighting into thinking about more strategic long-term issues. We believe strongly in Slovakia that everything should start from cleaning your own house. And that's why, at least when looking at our policies, we are very committed to the roadmap and the rules which have been set for the Eurozone, which means fulfilling the the main basic principles of the Growth and Stability Pact. As you know, we have a strong commitment by the government, my ministry, to have the deficit under 3% this year. We are also under the constitutional cap in terms of the debt levels. So all these things are part of the broader picture that we believe has to be established in every country to make sure that the stability is sustained. Slovakia also, as you know, participates in the EFSF, ESM, in the mechanisms which are part of the basically rescue mechanism for the Eurozone. And believe me, and my Slovak compatriots would agree that this is not an easy decision for Slovakia to contribute to the situations where basically the poor country in the Eurozone supports richer ones. But we do it because we believe this is part of our commitment and our belonging to the family of the European countries. Now, we have this certain level of stability, which is good. It makes us kind of happier, more relaxed. But as the title of this panel says, we should not fall into the trap of complacency. So what is next, and how do we avoid this? Again, I think we need to start from the national level. We have to make sure that the Eurozone is stabilized at its core, and now I mean core by its member states. It means we have to follow the basic rules of the Fiscal Compact, Growth and Stability Pact. As was already mentioned in the previous panel, we believe strongly that any exceptions from these rules, especially when it comes to bigger countries, is not a good idea. We also should follow the main roadmap which has been identified, and many of these topics have already been mentioned here, so I'm not going to repeat them. But basically the movement on the banking union, the movement towards direct bank recapitalizations through ESM, the strengthening of key elements of the economic and monetary union as they were outlined in the report by the three presidents. These are all elements that we need to move towards. But we also have to make a realistic assessment what is possible. And we have to take into account, obviously, also political realities. Among them also, for example, elections which are coming up. I would just mention two countries, Italy, Germany, and obviously results of these elections will also have major impact on how quickly we proceed on those issues. As already Panos mentioned, and I think this is very important, it's the issue of economic growth. Consolidation, providing stability to the countries and to public finance is one aspect. The other aspect is how do we use this element of stability for promoting economic growth. Without economic growth, we will not be able to deal with unemployment. We will not be able to move towards providing the goods for our citizens. I think that, and this will be my suggestion also towards Brussels, I think that we should probably put a kind of freeze on the new regulations coming from Brussels, especially those regulations which have potentially a negative impact on the key economic actors. As you know, for example, in Slovakia, we are in heavy discussions with the largest private investor and employer in Slovakia, which is the US steel company, which is in difficult situation also because of the impact of some of the economic regulations coming from the European level. So I think we need to probably take a time off to a certain degree and to make sure that the economic recovery and the competitiveness of Europe takes place and moves forward. The issues of liberalization of the markets, as well as the effective use of the EU funds, and we have concluded recently the kind of general agreement is an important element of that process as well. Now, to some of the questions that you raised, Mr. Chairman, for Slovakia to be a member of the Eurozone is, I would say, natural. It was a natural choice and it's part of our national interest. If you take into account that the overall volume of the imports and export represent about 180% of our GDP, Obviously, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that to be part of this monetary union makes sense. About 70% of our exports are within Eurozone, so the fact that we do not have to run into the issues of exchange rates and the volatility related to that is very important for us. My advice to the Czech friends, obviously, it's a national priority and the national choices. But obviously, I think it's very important that any decision towards joining Euro is based on as broad national consensus as possible. And I don't know what else to say. It is really something that should come out of the political agreement and then supported by the societal level. And on the last issue, as a new member of the Eurozone, we really don't feel inferior. I believe that when we are sitting, all the 17 around the table, whether it's at the level of Euro Working Group or whether it's the Eurozone Ministers of Finance at the level of ministers, all the voices are really heard. And I believe my colleagues from other countries of the Eurozone feel the same. And actually, I think it's a privilege for Slovakia to have a possibility to have an impact in such discussions. So we feel privileged to be part of the group. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, I mean, this was a first round, and maybe before opening the floor for questions, the panel members would like to react to something that was said by other panel members, and maybe I would follow the same order and ask Mr. Kassov first whether he would like to react to something that was said. I would have a specific question for Mr. Kassov, which is if one reads newspaper in the proximity of a vote of the Bundestag on some important measure that has to be taken regarding European policy, one gets a sense that this is a very risky situation and that you don't know what is going to happen. And this is ex ante. Exposed, when you count the votes, you see that 75% or 80% or something like that would have voted in favor of whatever the government has put forward. I mean, how can one reconcile this difference between the ex ante and the ex post view, or the view that maybe one gets by reading the Bild Zeitung, or the view that comes out of the formal votes of the Bundestag? So I don't know whether you want to address this question or any other question that has been put forward by the panelists.
Yeah, I will be as quick as possible again, and I will answer your question and two comments only to the others. What my Spanish colleague has said, of course, is fine, and of course we appreciate all what has been done, but of course, and indeed the Spanish situation seen on public finance was very favorable ex ante of the crisis, but nevertheless it's not just about breaking the circle between public debt and private debt is an important thing, and we have to see how we do it. And there are very specific questions about the legacy debt, but I think it's in any country which has problems, also a question of rechecking the growth model. And of course we have seen upcoming bubbles also in Spain, and of course there were always the question, what is fundamental, what is speculation, and I think we should also devote some analytic capacity to that this should not draw our views away from the real developments and the rising risks, which is construction in line with the banking system. And this brings me to the growth point. Of course, if we talk about growth, I think the important point is I do not share those who say macroeconomic policy is always bad or austerity comes first every time and everywhere. This is not true. But anyway, first of all, if you're thinking about jobs and growth, it's about potential growth. And this is that we have to keep up our competitiveness, that the others have to challenge Germany, that also Germany gets better in the end, that Germany gets not complacent in doing its own structural reforms. So this is this homework argument which I can only support to 100%. Now coming to this parliamentary question you put to me, and of course you know that every German politiker, the first press thing he reads in the morning is the Bild-Zeitung, because it sets the themes for the day. But nevertheless, let's say it this way. So far, I think there is a majority in the parliament for supportive measures. But it's also the case that the ruling government probably does not have that majority anymore. So there is the situation in Germany that with the votes of the opposition, there will be a way forward. And this is, of course, nothing what any government would like to have. So I think the election will probably bring more clearance here. I think Germany will also in the future support all measures which are there, and I think so far nobody can say that Germany has been an obstacle to things, but again, there are certain principles, there are certain views, I think, which not only German views, which are shared by, I think, quite a lot of other member states, where we have to stick to in the end. And I have already given a hint in my presentation, or short presentation at the beginning, that also the Constitutional Court in Germany might have a vote at the end about what is the core of national sovereignty still, in spite, of course, of building a federal European Union.
Thank you very much. Mr. De Mesa, you may want to react to something that other panelists have said. I would have a follow-up question on your presentation. You referred to important structural measures, and of course, Mr. Kastrup has referred to growth potential. My specific question is, if you would have to define or measure the progress that has been done on structural measures in terms of potential growth, would it be possible to say that there has been a significant improvement of potential growth in the case of Spain because of these structural measures? Would this prospective improvement in the GDP situation help the current situation in Spain, because people would see growth coming, and that could help both politically and economically? So would you like to say something more about the structural measures, in particular product market measures, their potential, their effect on potential growth?
Yes, I think that obviously in a country like Spain with almost 26% of unemployment rate, the most important reform and the most urgent reform was the reform of the labor market, and this is the priority of the government, and this is why probably the first reform that was undertook last year was the reform of the labor market. That we had probably one of the most inefficient labor market framework, and it was improved very substantially last year, reducing the dismissal cost, increasing the flexibility in the wage bargaining system. And as I said before, it has bear fruits very quickly. In 2012, for the first time, we decouple the wage increases to inflation. This kind of indexation that was very helpful for the correct functioning of the Spanish economy, it started to improve. But we are not going to stop there. And a few days ago, we have approved a new law that increase and simplify the administrative procedures inside Spain to carry out businesses. It is what we call the domestic market union, and this is a very ambitious law that simplify the administrative barriers that are inside the different regions to carry out business. So this is another kind of measures that will have a long-term impact on economic growth. So I think growth is very important, and I agree with other speakers that at the end of the day, we are taking painful measures in the fiscal side, in the structural side, and people need to see results. People need to see that these efforts are bearing fruits. Last year was a very strange year because I have to say about Spain that, well, I mean, when we requested the banking program that was supposed to push spreads down, it happened the opposite. I mean, spreads came up and it seems like we were going to lose access to the market. When we announced that a very ambitious fiscal program in July, I mean, spreads go up as well. So it was nobody understand anything. And I think that the situation this year is much calmer, and the markets are reacting more positively to all the reforms. But I think that just to finalize these remarks, that we need a rebalancing. On the one hand, we need to change public sector demand for private sector demand, and in our case, we have to change domestic demand for external demand. I mean, in Spain, during the early 20s, I mean, we had a very dynamic domestic demand that helped other countries like Germany that were very low growth countries. And probably what we need is what we did in the early 20s, Germany with a more dynamic domestic demand that could help countries like Spain that cannot, I mean, because we have a very high level of private debt, we cannot push our domestic demand. It should be those countries with more margin of maneuver.
Thank you very much. Now coming to Mr. Tzakloglou, maybe I would like to ask you an analogous question to the one that I asked to Mr. Castor, where I would not put the Bilder Zeitung and the Bundesbank on one side, but I would put Syntagma Square and your parliament on the two sides. I mean, if one looks at not so much recently, but what television reported about what is happening in Syntagma Square, one gets the impression that there is no support for what the government is doing, and yet when you had your elections, which were a complicated thing, but ended in a certain way, and one looks at what happens in Parliament, one gets a different impression. So, I mean, how do we reconcile these two different images that we have about the situation in Greece? And if I can sort of add to that, is there any sense that the structural reforms that are conducted, and here I address something that I asked to Mr. De Mesa, are increasing the potential rate of growth of the Greek economy, which could help in giving a hope of growth, which you said is important to avoid this gap between, I would call, Syntagma Square and the Parliament explodes, so to say. Is there a sense that going forward, the structural measures promise something to your unemployed, to your young unemployed as well?
Right, thank you very much. First of all, for those who do not know, Syntagma Square is the square in front of the parliament in Greece, and actually Syntagma in Greek means constitution, therefore this is Constitution Square. Indeed, there were huge demonstrations. That was a year and a half ago. However, then the real poll came, and the real poll was decisive. Greek population wants to stay in the European Union. This is it. Second, if you go to psychology, they have about the 5 stages of the crisis. First there is denial, then there is this and this and that, until you come to the realization of the problem. And I have the feeling that this is where Greek society is at the moment. Definitely, this question of yours is a very worthy one. There is no question that structural reforms do deliver in the longer term. However, I repeat this question I asked before. How long is the long term? I can give you a concrete example. One of the first reforms that we did in the product market, it was the abolition of several restrictions that existed in long haulage, transportation in long distance and so on. According to several econometric estimates that we had before, the potential in terms of lost output of the restrictions was an enormous one. Despite the fact that the market is open for the last couple of years, there were actually less than 1,000 new licenses produced. Why? There is no demand there. Demand has collapsed in Greece. To get this extra license, to do what with it? Therefore, all these things are really interrelated. This brings me to the question that you invited us to ask earlier on. There is a more general sort of a question that is related not only to the topic of this panel, but of the previous panel as well. Everybody hinted at something, that the solution is more Europe. I fully subscribe to this view. The European project, in my opinion, is a project of those ones that in game theory they call dynamic positive sum games. And this is not only in the economic sphere, it is in the political sphere as well. Look what happened. It is the longest period of peace that we have in European history. This is not something to be underestimated. And I'm absolutely sure that the European Union did play a very, very important role there. Now, what's the problem there? The problem is something that was hinted in the previous panel. It is about the ownership of all these programs. There is a tendency in most European countries that come to my mind for the politicians to ascribe everything possible to the local politics and everything that hints at something negative as something that has been imposed by Brussels. This does not augur well for European integration as such. This may give, let's say, the kind of background for the development of populist parties, and this does not fit well with this more Europe project that I mentioned before. I mentioned straight from the beginning that it is true that the European project was never a product of the masses. It was primarily an elitist project. However, whenever this project was delivering, popular support for it was rising. And we have to find ways to move it forward.
Thank you very much. Urban Radek, you may want to... I would wish to add one question. I mean, in your if I understood your statement, one point of your statement was that it's good to have crisis because they inoculate you and you will not fall to the next sickness. I mean, do I overread your statement in saying that, okay, the euro area is having its crisis, it's having its inoculation, so it will make it easier for countries that have not yet adopted the euro, and I mean, you are touched on this issue, to do that in due course, because there is more of a confidence that they are not going to be infected.
First, deep sympathies for Greece and Spain for the efforts they have done. I cannot imagine living in a country with 27% unemployment. I cannot. I mean, and this is such a great achievement that we do not appreciate, and other achievements as well. In the reaction to what I've said earlier, I have to return this statement. I think that it's not the complacency in the Eurozone now, it's the complacency outside of the Eurozone, because we are falsely believing that we can sit and relax and see how Eurozone will deal with their own crisis. And this is wrong. I think this is the message that I am bringing home. We must not sit and wait how the Eurozone will deal with their crisis, because it's not their crisis. It is a common situation for all Europe. And as I said earlier, it is also in our interest, in the non-Eurozone countries' interest. We all believe in the common European project. So the message I'll bring home is definitely we must participate in the solution of the crisis that exists now.
Thank you very much. Now the last panelist, you may want to react, but if I sort of picked one point in your presentation, that was the difficulty for countries to contribute financially to the ESM, to the FSF. In particular, if the transfer is from a country that has a lower GDP per head to a country that has higher GDP per head. But my question is, are there not two different kind of transfer conceptually? One is the transfer of an insurance kind. So it's not from rich to poor, but is from those that have a positive shock to those who have a negative shock. So it's a mutual insurance mechanism, nothing to do with GDP level. And the other one is exactly connected to GDP level, richer contribute to poorer. And I think that there is an agreement that the economic rationale is much more for the mutual insurance kind of transfer than for the rich to poor. The rich to poor has political dimension, but not much of an economic base. So would you agree that it's useful to distinguish between these two types of transfers and agree as well that the mutual insurance has more economic rationale than the rich to poor? And what is if you agree on these two statements, what is the political or the economic policy meaning of this differentiation?
Yeah, I would agree with what you said, and certainly, I mean, the fact that Slovakia does participate and contribute to the EFSF, ESM, and we are actually a creditor. There are not many situations when we, as Slovakia, are creditors to the international society. This is actually in our self-interest. It's in our self-interest in the sense that more stability in Eurozone, in our natural environment, means also more stability for us and more prosperity for us. Because we can only benefit from better development and better situation in our neighborhood. As I already mentioned, 80%, 85% of our GDP is from exports. And the second aspect is that this is also a very important message that we are sending about Slovakia and how we feel about the European situation. So we look at those contributions in this way. One reaction, if I may, to my colleagues on the panel, I would like to especially stress what Panos said from Greece. And I think what he said has a special meaning in Slovakia. As we know, de facto 2 governments in Slovakia, recent governments, failed because of Greece. So it is an emotional issue. But I think we can feel proud that whether this was the government led by the Red Party or Blue Party, we stayed committed to the European cause. And this commitment is there, and it continues. Also the fact that in Slovakia we do have politicians who have constantly argued that Greece is just a black box, and any support will disappear. I think what you said, and all the major changes which are happening, for example, achieving the primary balance of the budget next year, is something which is a major improvement and change. And it's very painful. It's something that the Greek population has to really suffer through. And I think it's a very important message to everybody that then a change is possible. Of course, we are at the beginning of the road, more or less, but a change is possible. And it's also a message that if we stay together and stick together, work together in difficult times, then we can also benefit from the improvements later on. So I'm very glad, Panos, that you came here and you were able to deliver this message even here in Slovakia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that we started half an hour late. I think we should end half an hour late. So we have another 20-25 minutes for questions from the floor and answer from our panelists over there.
Thank you. Peter Spiegel from the Financial Times. On this topic of complacency, I'd like a question for the German and the Spanish members of the panel. There was some discussion last night about this issue of sticking to deficit targets, and particularly nominal headline targets, whether this is advisable. We've seen Olli Rehn and the European Commission talk more about structural budgets, structural changes. I'm curious if the BMF has a view on this. We've heard the ECB view last night, whether you think it is advisable to stick to those nominal targets, or if we move away from them, is that a sign of complacency? And I asked the Spanish representative as well, because despite the Rajoy government's attempts to stick to those targets, it looks like this year Spain will not. The Commission has already decided that Spain has done the tough structural reform needed that they are waiving the nominal targets and saying that because you've done the structural work, therefore we don't need to meet the nominal targets. Is that something that should be applied to other countries as well? Thank you.
Maybe we can collect a few questions.
Ivan Kun, Conservative Institute, Slovakia. Since Greece joined EU in 1981, it was more than 30 years. It has been the largest net beneficiary from the European funds, cohesion fund, structural funds. Spain was probably the second. There may be differences in per capita and in total. Yet both countries are big problems now. So the question is really the answer, as it was said here, more Europe, which in fact means more regulations and more money transfers. And not only from the rich country to the poor one, as we have seen over the last dozens of years, but also from the poorer countries like Slovakia to rich one, if we compare the GDP of these countries or average income in national economy. I'm pointing on a speech of British Prime Minister Cameron, who proposed a different prospect for future of Europe, which is somehow not even mentioned in this or previous debates. So is really the only option more Europe, or we have other options? Thank you.
I think we have heard this question already, but of course it's nicer to put it again so that there can be answers from the panelists. Anybody else? Please, over there.
Yes, Lano from SEPS, also in Brussels. Sorry, I bring a debate from Brussels here, but what I think was reflected a lot in the panel this morning and also in this panel is democratic accountability and what is the support for what we are doing. I lack this, and I don't feel that a circle has been squared on that. Let's say, is it more European Parliament? Is it more national parliaments' involvement? And what is being going on? And what I was above all surprised with when I hear you speaking, many of these people know the Eurogroup and the levels below, these committees below. There is insufficient reflection towards the public opinion of what is being done in these groups. And that is, I think, extremely important. That was emphasized in the previous panel, also in this panel. We have done a lot together, but does the public opinion know how important it is? Does the public opinion know that, as some of you were saying, there is no alternative? I don't think so. If I look at recent Eurobarometer results about the support for Europe, they are dramatic. I mean, those which are negative to very negative about the EU have risen to 30%. Those which are in favor have fallen from 50 to 30%. So there is a huge problem. And if we then have to reform or make Europe more accountable, the word which Christian mentioned, federal, is even not a word which can be mentioned in certain member states. In Germany, it's normal that you mention it. In Belgium, we are also a federal construction, but in other member states, the word F is forbidden to be raised in a European context. So I ask, what are the reformables to support this strengthening of the center through the ESM, through the banking union, and so on, towards European parliaments, national parliament, the public at large?
So maybe one other question, and then we give the floor to our panelists.
My name is Hošek. I'm independent consultant and analyst in EcoCrim Slovakia. I have a question to gentlemen. It surprised me very much the relations of the money of citizens in Visegrad 4 countries in offshores centers, and I was surprised to statistics or to comments of press and, for instance, UK press Guardian, which mentions, for instance, that Slovakian citizens has in offshores more money as is Slovak debt, or about saved money. So the Slovak debt is $36,000 million, and offshore's money are about $30,000 million. I would say billion, because billion is 1,000 million. And same Hungary, Poland, it's maybe about $100,000 million of money of citizens in last 20 years moved from these Visegrad 4 countries, Poland, Hungary, to offshore areas. So compared with this money can be simply paid the huge government debt. Thank you.
Okay, so I would give the floor to our panelists. We have 4 questions, very different in kind, one from the other. We have one on nominal versus structural fiscal targets. We have, again, the question about whether it's a good idea to continue with Europe or whether we should step back. There is a question about the democratic accountability and public opinion towards Europe. And then this last question about offshore money. So there is a very wide menu. And maybe the panelists, this time in inverse order, would like to pick and choose which one of the questions they want to address. So, Mr. Hudak, would you like to start?
Well, I think the question which is probably the closest to the Slovak aspect is the last one in terms of the flow of money outside of, in this case, Slovakia to the offshore areas. I think there are 2 elements to this. One, we do need to do a better job internally to basically create opportunities for investment of savings of the Slovak citizens in Slovakia. And also to create the level of stability and confidence in the banking sector in Slovakia, which would keep the money at home. There is one aspect. Our banking sector is stable, so I don't see much problem there. In terms of the investment opportunities, as you know, we are, for example, thinking about the issuance of the government bond for citizens, so that we also would create new opportunities for the Slovak citizens to invest their savings into the instruments which are more or less guaranteed and stable. The other aspect is how to deal with the offshore areas and especially kind of legal offshores including within the Euro area or Eurozone and European Union. There is a heavy discussion in Brussels, in the national capitals, how to deal with this issue. This became quite, I would say, intense when we were talking, and we are still discussing the potential support to Cyprus, for example. As we know, Slovakia does have not very good history with companies being registered in Cyprus, but actually working in Slovakia under kind of murky arrangements. And as was already communicated several times, we have been pushing as a Slovak delegation in the discussion of the Eurogroup and Eurozone officials with the support from Germany, from Finland and other countries to include into a draft memorandum for possible assistance to Cyprus a clause which would say that there should be improvement of the tax exchange information and information about anti-money laundering and this type of issues. So the work is ongoing, and I see already some progress, but certainly more has to be done.
Thank you. To the question of Mr. Lano about does the public know? I'm afraid to say that certainly, at least in the Czech Republic, the public does not know and generally does not care. It's because of the split stance of the political representation. This is a country where the support for or against future membership of Euro is about 50-50. This is the country where the debate in the forthcoming elections will also be centered around how far we will be pushing the entry into the Eurozone. But also, this is a country which cannot imagine what real austerity means. Czech Republic is a country where you can lose elections if you propose a healthcare reform that contains €1 nominal fee for a doctor's visit. So I'm afraid to say that in the Czech Republic, the public does not know and does not appreciate what has been done so far. Unfortunately, I can't say about other countries.
Please.
Naturally, I will reply to this question that was related directly or indirectly to Greece. First of all, let me correct a factual mistake there. In per capita terms, the beneficiary with the highest benefit all these years in the European Union, it was neither Greece nor Spain, it was Ireland. But leaving this one account, I must say that this approach is kind of myopic. It is looking only at gains from the EU budget. It does not take at all into account gains from trade. There are several models that incorporate gains in trade, and they seem to indicate that the distribution of gains along the European Union is somehow different. Second, despite the fact that Greece is in the current crisis and so on, from 1980, when Greece entered the European Union, until 2008, it was a non-linear, but it was a convergence process. That is, Greece was approaching the core. It was not a divergence process. And in fact, if it was not the crisis and we were allowed ourselves some kind of a linear projection, then even in terms of EU budget, the benefits of all this discussion that was last week, was taking place in Brussels, would have been considerably smaller. Now, to the question that was mentioned about Slovakia, and I'm really happy that I'm given this opportunity. Let me make something very clear. Greek people are grateful to all the people of the countries that helped us in this very difficult situation. And we are doubly grateful to people of countries where we know that the standard of living is lower than the one that we have in Greece. However, you must also take into account that indeed the alternative to having this help going through this difficult period that Greece is currently going might have been devastating for Greece, but the price would have been extremely heavy for the rest of the Eurozone countries, and in my opinion, even for the idea of the European project itself, not only the Euro project, the European project itself. Now, if I come to this very interesting question about the UK proposal and so on, essentially, what is this proposal? It is, let's say, just to transform the European Union into a free trade area. The core of the argument is this one there. Again, I will refer to this thing that I mentioned before, that in the current shape, the European project is a dynamic positive-sum game. There is no doubt that positive-sum game would have been a free trade area. However, the gains in the longer term would be substantially smaller, not only in the economic sphere, but also in the political sphere and the sphere of international relations too. Therefore, from this point of view, I have the feeling that the path that we are following here, however difficult it may be, it is far more preferable.
Thank you. Mr. Demese.
Thank you. Yes, on the question, first question about the structural versus nominal deficits, I think that the Commission and the Euro area has proved to be flexible in assessing the situation of countries. I think both measures are important. At the end of the day, what we should aim at is at a reduction in the nominal deficit, which is the one that is going to reduce the level of debt. And this is something that is very obvious and is what markets are looking at. But, well, I mean, the measures of the efforts made by governments are taken into account as well using the structural deficit. So in our case, I mean, we have done in 2012 a huge effort in the structural terms, but, and it has as well have a very large impact in nominal terms. So, we will release pretty soon our figures of deficit, and we will see, I mean, that structural efforts have had as well a very important impact in nominal terms. I mean, being close to the deficit that we have agreed in Europe. But both measures are pretty important.
Please.
Okay, so to the questions very quickly. Of course, I would not give up the nominal figures right now. We need them as kind of an outer limit. But I think I am also on the side of those who say we have clearly moved to the structural figures. And the structural figures are the only realistic instrument if you want to avoid mistakes in good times. And I think this is where it's all about. All our countries, even Germany from time to time, we have ruined our budgets in good times when the cash was flowing. And therefore, the new anchor of the system for me clearly should be the structural figures. And I think in the end, we could, for some years to come, then we could move away from the nominal terms. I know there is this communication argument, nominal terms is something you really observe. But anyway, if we want to steer our budgets on realistic and not politically driven opinions about what is cash and what is structural and what is cyclical, we need structural figures. It's not going without it, and we have the duty, the damn duty, to explain to our parliamentarians. So, second question, I think I'll be very brief in my first remarks, but I also see what belongs to a federal level has to be seen not only from the theory of federations, but also from the experience of federation. And of course, there must be the possibility also to give back things we are now doing on a federal level back to national authorities, of course. So in both ways, it must be possible. I'm strongly proposing here to build up common preferences, and where preferences can be are broader than a group of countries, then they can rally together and get the necessary institutions. And we can do this then also on the federal level. So both must be. So I'm strongly proposing to go forward in more integration, doing more federation, but this does not mean what is now on federal level has to stay there for eternity. This is, it's a stupid approach, and there Cameron has a point. The second, and this goes directly to this communication argument. I also fully share the communication argument, and Europe, I think, needs new identification. This is clear to be seen after the end of the Cold War, especially. And I am strongly have the same thinking as Franz put it here in the morning. I think we probably will not build with somewhat diverging preferences in labor, fiscal, economics. So we will not build the European identification overall, which then maybe changes the votes again. We will. I fear. I'm an economist. I fear economics will not do it alone. We need other identification, and this defense is there. There is something in defense, but. Let's think about what's really a public good for our countries, seeing ourselves as European as a body. And then one last proposal or an idea. We have the European Parliament, and I don't know whether members of the EP are here in the room. They will probably punish me now, but I could also imagine to look whether we cannot involve national parliaments more directly in European issues. So I could think about something which might be a chamber of, say, a kind of a budgetary committee consisting of national parliamentarians directly being involved in the European processes. It's a very vague thing. It's not an official German proposal. I'm just thinking aloud on myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's time to close. I would myself like to make 3 points. I will not try to summarize, but I would like to make 3 points. The first about communication and democratic accountability. I fully share that the situation there is not satisfactory, but we should not get to the extreme of not recognizing that the European project has been going on for 60 years. And if the electorate would have liked to stop it, they would have had many, many occasions during elections to stop it. And they never stopped it. They always allowed it to continue. So, yes, we need more, but let's not get nihilistic and say that we have got nothing so far in terms of approval of the body of the electorate in Europe. And this is my first point. My second point is that I think our discussion here shows that there is great effort that is done by all possible agents to get out of the crisis, and there is a clear sense of direction where we want to go. At the same time, there is great uncertainty about the timing and the modalities of the exit from the crisis. So yes, we are marching in the right direction at good speed, but there is quite a lot more that has to be done. My third point is the most important of all, and this is many, many thanks to the panelists, many, many thanks to the organizers for this interesting session and generally for this interesting conference. And with that, I think that we are on time to close. Thank you very much.